He hears them coming before he sees them. Footsteps, voices, the particular sound a crowd makes when it is moving with purpose, sandals on packed earth, children being called back, the low murmur of people who have heard something worth walking toward. He steps off the road. He always steps off the road, not because he wants to, because he has to, because the law is clear, and the law has been clear for as long as anyone can remember, and the law says that a man like him, a man whose skin has turned against him, whose flesh has become his exile, must keep his distance, must announce himself, must give the clean world enough time to move away before he moves through it. Unclean, he says. His voice is flat with practice. Unclean. The crowd parts. It always parts. That, at least, is reliable. He watches them pass, merchants, farmers, a woman with a clay jar balanced on her head, children who stare too long before their mothers pull them away. He watches them the way you watch a river from a bank you are not allowed to cross. Close enough to see, too far to touch. This is the world Jesus walked into. Not a clean world. Not a world that had found a way to be kind about its categories. A world with hard edges, ritually pure and ritually impure, inside and outside, touchable and untouchable. And the edges were enforced not by cruelty alone but by theology. By a reading of scripture that said holiness meant separation, that purity was something you protected by keeping your distance from everything that threatened it. The book of Leviticus was not subtle about this. If you touched something unclean, you became unclean. The contamination traveled. It moved from the impure body outward, toward whatever it contacted next. A leper touched a garment. The garment was unclean. A bleeding woman touched a chair. The chair was unclean. Anyone who sat in the chair, unclean. The logic was hydraulic. Impurity flowed uphill, toward the clean, and there was only one direction it ever moved. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, describes in precise detail how seriously this was enforced in communities across Judea. Those with skin diseases were kept outside city walls. They were barred from temple worship. They were, in the most literal sense, removed from the life of their people. Not as punishment, exactly, but as protection. The community protected itself from what it could not cure. Rabbis did not touch the sick. This was not considered unkind. It was considered wise. Distance was holiness. Separation was piety. You could pray for the suffering man on the road. You could throw him food. You could send someone to help. But you did not touch him, because touching him made you like him. And then who would be left to stay clean? This is the world into which a young rabbi from Nazareth walked, teaching in synagogues, drawing crowds, speaking with an authority that made people lean forward and forget to breathe. And then he started touching people, not accidentally, not in the confusion of a crowd, where contact was unavoidable, deliberately, intentionally, reaching out his hand and making contact with the very bodies the rest of the world had agreed to stop touching. He could have healed every single one of them without touching a single one of them. The Gospels make clear he had that power. He healed a Roman centurion's servant from across the city with nothing but a word. He raised Lazarus from the tomb with a shout. Distance was never a limitation. He chose not to use it. And that choice, repeated, deliberate, scandalous, is what we're going to spend the next 25 minutes sitting with. Because it is not incidental to who Jesus was. It is not a detail. It is, I would argue, one of the clearest windows into what he believed about holiness, about humanity, and about what it means to be the kind of God who actually shows up. Matthew tells the story in 3 verses. That is all he gives you. 3 verses, almost casual in their brevity, as if what happened was not the most theologically explosive moment in the opening chapters of his gospel. A man with leprosy comes to Jesus, kneels, says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Notice what he does not say. He does not say, "If you are able." He has seen enough, heard enough, to believe that ability is not the question. The question, the only question that matters to a man who has spent years being avoided, is willingness. Are you willing to deal with me? Are you willing to come close? Are you willing to cross the line that everyone else has respected so carefully? Jesus looks at him. The crowd is there. Matthew makes sure you know there's a crowd, because crowds matter to this story. Crowds are the measure of what is at stake socially, religiously, reputationally. And Jesus does something the crowd is not prepared for. He reaches out his hand, and he touches him. The Greek word Matthew uses is hapto. Haptioh. It does not mean a brush of the fingertips. It does not mean a cautious, gloved contact. Hapto means to fasten to cling to. It is the word you use for a grip, for contact that is held, not withdrawn. Jesus did not tap the man on the shoulder and step back. He touched him the way you touch someone you are not afraid of, the way you touch someone you want to reach. And here is what should have happened. By every law and every precedent and every piece of received wisdom in first-century Judea, the impurity should have traveled. The contamination should have moved, as it always moved, from the unclean body outward. Jesus should have become unclean. The crowd should have scattered. The rabbis standing at the edge of the crowd should have shaken their heads and walked away. Here is what actually happened. The man was healed. Immediately. Completely. The contamination did not move toward Jesus. The wholeness moved from Jesus toward the man. The current ran backwards. The river flowed uphill. This is not a small thing. This is not a medical curiosity dressed up in religious language. This is a statement, made not with words but with a hand, held out and held firm, about what kind of force Jesus carried. The purity system said impurity was stronger than purity. That uncleanness traveled, and cleanness had to be protected. Jesus, by touching this man and remaining whole, was saying something different. He was saying, what is in me is stronger than what is in you. Not your disease, not your exile, not the years of being told you were too broken to be touched. You are not stronger than what I carry. He did it again in Bethsaida. A blind man was brought to him, and instead of speaking a word, which he could have done, which he had done before, Jesus took him by the hand and led him outside the village, away from the crowd, away from the noise. Then he did something strange, even by the standards of everything else he was doing. He touched the man's eyes, spit on his hands and touched the man's eyes, and asked, "Do you see anything?" The man looked up. "I see people," he said. "They look like trees, walking." Partial sight. The touch had worked, but not completely. And Jesus touched him again, a second time, held his hands over the man's eyes and waited. And this time, when the man looked up, he saw everything clearly. Why 2 touches? Why not 1? Jesus, who stopped storms with a sentence, who fed thousands with a boy's lunch. Why did he touch this particular man twice? You could read it as a limitation. You could. But there's another way to read it. And I think it is closer to what Mark is trying to show you. The touch was not a mechanism. It was not a switch being flipped. It was a conversation. Jesus was not performing a procedure. He was present with a person, checking in, staying close, responding to what he found. The second touch was not a correction. It was a continuation. It was Jesus saying, "I am not finished with you yet. I am still here. Stay with me." Peter's mother-in-law is sick in bed when Jesus arrives at the house. Fever, which in the ancient world was not an inconvenience, but a genuine threat, something that could take a person quickly, without warning. Jesus goes to her. He does not stand at the doorway and offer a blessing. He takes her hand. He lifts her up, and the fever leaves. She gets up, and the first thing she does, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all agree on this, is serve. She gets up and serves them. Some people read that detail and feel uncomfortable. A woman healed and immediately put back to work. Is that the point? But I think you miss something if you read it that way. In that world, in that home, hospitality was not servitude. It was agency. It was participation. It was belonging. The fever had taken her out of the life of the house. Jesus' touch gave her back her place in it. She did not serve because she had to. She served because she could again. The touch did not just restore her health. It restored her to herself. Every time, every single time, the logic ran backwards. The wholeness traveled. The exile ended. Not with distance. Not with a spoken word from across a safe and careful room. With a hand, reached out and held. She has been bleeding for 12 years. Sit with that number for a moment. 12 years. Not a wound that healed slowly. Not an illness that came and went in seasons. 12 years of waking up every morning to the same body, the same condition, The same verdict the world had already handed down about what she was allowed to touch, where she was allowed to go, whose life she was allowed to be part of. Under Levitical law, a woman with a discharge of blood was ceremonially unclean. Not just herself, everything she touched, every chair, every bed, every person whose hand she took. The uncleanness radiated outward from her the way it radiated from the leper on the road, the way it radiated from every untouchable body in that world. She was not forbidden from public life by a locked door or a guard. She was forbidden by a system so thoroughly internalized that she enforced it herself. You do not touch people when you know what your touch does to them. Mark tells you she had suffered under many doctors, spent everything she had, grown worse, not better. 12 years of remedies that did not work, of money handed over to people who could not help her, of hope raised and disappointed so many times that by the time she hears Jesus is passing through her town, she does not go to him the way the leper went, openly, kneeling, asking. She goes the way a person goes when they have stopped believing they deserve to ask. She goes from behind. The crowd is dense. Mark says people are pressing in on all sides. The Greek suggests something close to crushing, a mass of bodies moving with the energy of people who believe something extraordinary is about to happen. She moves through that crowd the way water moves through rock, finding gaps, keeping her head down, not meeting eyes. She has a plan, and the plan is small, and the plan is this. If she can just touch the edge of his garment, the hem, the fringe, not him, not really, just the outermost edge of what belongs to him, maybe that will be enough. She reaches out, her fingers find the fabric, and immediately, Mark's word, the word he uses over and over in his gospel for the speed at which things happen around Jesus, immediately she feels it. The bleeding stops. Something moves through her body, like a current switching direction, and she knows, the way you know certain things in your body before your mind catches up, that she is healed. She starts to pull back, to disappear into the crowd the way she came. No one saw. No one needs to know. She got what she came for, and now she can leave, and maybe, she can start to find out what a normal life feels like after 12 years of this one. And then Jesus stops. He stops walking. In the middle of a pressing, moving, breathing crowd, he stops, and he says, and you can almost hear the disciples' confusion in Mark's telling of it. Who touched me? The disciples think it is almost absurd. Master, the crowd is crushing us from every side, and you are asking who touched you? Everyone touched you. No one touched you any more specifically than anyone else. But Jesus is not talking about the pressure of a crowd. He is talking about something else entirely. I felt power go out from me. He says, touch for him was never passive. It was never simply contact. Something moved when he was touched, not taken from him against his will, but recognized, responded to, released. The woman's faith had reached for him, and he had felt it. She comes forward, trembling. Mark uses that word specifically, trembling, and she falls at his feet and tells him everything. The whole story. 12 years of it, all of it spilling out in front of the crowd. She has spent 12 years avoiding. And Jesus looks at her and says one word before anything else. Daughter, not woman. Not you there. Daughter. The only time in any of the 4 Gospels that Jesus addresses someone he has just met with that word. It is not a clinical word. It is not a religious word. It is a family word. A word that places her, this woman who has spent 12 years on the outside of everything, inside something, inside a relationship, inside a belonging she had not asked for and had not expected, and perhaps, after 12 years, had stopped believing was available to her. Your faith has healed you, he says. Go in peace, and be freed from your suffering. He did not touch her. She touched him, and the current ran backwards anyway, because of course it did, because that is what kept happening around him, because the direction of the flow was not determined by who reached first, but by what he carried. But he stopped. That is the thing you cannot move past too quickly. He stopped everything. Stopped the crowd. Stopped the moment. Stopped the forward motion of a day that had other urgent business in it. To make sure she knew she had been seen. Not just healed. Seen. Called by a name that meant she belonged somewhere. Sent away, not just cured but restored to peace. To wholeness. To a life that had been on hold for 12 years. She didn't ask for his touch. She didn't think she deserved it. She reached for the hem, because the hem was all she felt she had the right to ask for. He gave her so much more than that. Now, if this video is doing something for you, if it is opening up the Gospels in a way that feels new or surprising or worth sitting with, this is a good moment to subscribe. If you have not already, hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. Because what comes next is the touch that, I would argue, is the most unexpected of all. There's a moment in Luke's Gospel that most people walk past without stopping. A funeral procession is moving through the gate of a town called Nain. The dead man is young. Luke makes a point of telling you this, the way he makes a point of telling you that his mother is a widow, that this son was her only son, that she is now alone in the particular way that a woman without husband or son was alone in the ancient world. Not just grieving, unmoored. The financial and social structure of her life has just been carried out the gate in a wooden box. And the crowd walking with her is the crowd that walks with people when there is nothing left to say. Jesus is coming the other way. He sees the procession. He sees her. Luke uses a word here, splagnizomai, splankinomai. It is one of the most visceral words in the Greek New Testament, and it is almost impossible to translate without losing something. It means compassion, yes, but not the polite, managed compassion of someone who feels appropriately sorry. It means compassion that moves through the body. The word comes from the Greek for internal organs, bowels, gut, the deep interior of a person. When Luke says Jesus was moved with compassion, he means something physical happened. Something shifted in him before he had made any decision. He felt her grief in his body before he acted on it. And then he acts on it. He walks to the coffin, in broad daylight, in front of two converging crowds, with mourners and disciples and curious onlookers all watching. He reaches out and touches the coffin. A coffin, a dead body. The highest category of ritual impurity in the Levitical system. Numbers chapter 19 is unambiguous. Contact with a corpse, or with anything that has touched a corpse, brings 7 days of uncleanness. Priests were forbidden from touching the dead except for their closest family. The high priest was forbidden entirely. The coffin was not a metaphor. It was a boundary marker, as clear and serious as the leper's cry of unclean on the road. Jesus touches it anyway. The procession stops. Of course it stops. You stop when a stranger puts his hand on the coffin. And Jesus says, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sits up and begins to talk. And Jesus gives him back to his mother. That last line, Jesus gives him back to his mother, is Luke being precise about something. The miracle is not only the resurrection. The miracle is the restoration. The young man gets his life back, but she gets hers back too. The touch was for both of them. It always was. Then there were the children. The disciples had decided, not cruelly, just practically, that Jesus had more important things to do than be interrupted by parents wanting him to bless their children. He was teaching. He was healing. There were serious people with serious needs, and children were not, in that world, considered serious business. They were brought forward, and the disciples turned them away. Mark says Jesus was indignant. Not mildly annoyed. Indignant, the word implies a strong, active displeasure, the kind that produces movement. He tells the disciples to let the children come. And then Mark uses a word found nowhere else in the entire New Testament. Enagalisamenos, enankalizamenos, to enfold in the arms, to gather completely, not a pat on the head, not a hand placed briefly on a small shoulder. He took them into his arms and held them there and blessed them. The word is so specific, so deliberately physical, that Mark must have chosen it on purpose. This was not a gesture. This was an embrace. In a world where touch was rationed by purity, by status, by what a person's presence could do to your standing, Jesus kept reaching for the people everyone else had decided were not worth the reach. The sick, the bleeding, the dead, and now the small, the ones who had not yet done anything important enough to deserve a rabbi's time. You begin to see the pattern. Not just who he touched, but who he touched when no one would have expected it. When every social script said, "Not now, not here, not this person." And then came Gethsemane. It is late, later than late. The kind of dark that sits on a city after everything has gone quiet. Jesus has been praying in the garden, his sweat falling like drops of blood, the weight of what is coming pressing on him in a way none of his disciples fully understood, even though they were right there beside him. Judas has already left the table. The soldiers are already moving. They come with torches and swords and the particular efficiency of men who have been given a job and intend to finish it. Judas walks to the front. You know the rest. Peter, impulsive, loyal, terrified Peter, draws his sword. And in the chaos and the torchlight and the confusion of the moment, he strikes. The servant of the high priest goes down. His name is Malchus. His ear is gone. This is the moment. This is the one that changes everything about all the ones before it. Jesus is in the middle of his own arrest. The men who have come to take him away are standing in a circle around him. His closest friends are scattering. The path to the cross has just become a road, rather than a possibility. And he, in this moment, in this chaos, he reaches down. He picks up what Peter's sword has taken. He touches the ear of the man who came to arrest him, and Malchus is healed. Think about what that means. Think about who Malchus is in this story. He is not a seeker. He is not desperate. He is not an outcast who has run out of options. He is the servant of the man who wants Jesus dead. He is, in this moment, on the wrong side of everything. He came to Gethsemane to help end the ministry that all the previous touches had built. And Jesus heals him anyway. This is the last miracle before the cross, the last recorded touch of his ministry. And he spends it on his enemy, not on a disciple who needed reassurance, not on a frightened follower who needed strength for what was coming. On Malchus, on the man holding the rope. Every touch before this one was scandalous because of who Jesus touched. The unclean, the untouchable, the overlooked, the dead. This one is scandalous because of when, because of what it cost, because of what was already in motion that he paused, that he stopped, just as he stopped for the bleeding woman. Just as he stopped the funeral procession at Nain, to reach toward someone who had given him nothing and come to take everything. You do not do that by accident. You do not do that out of habit or reflex or the momentum of a ministry that had developed certain patterns. You do that because it is who you are, because what you carry is so much larger than the moment you're standing, and that even your own arrest cannot stop it from moving toward the person in front of you. And if you are watching this and you have never thought about Jesus this way before, not as a distant theological figure, but as someone who kept stopping, kept reaching, kept touching the people everyone else had passed, I would love for you to stay with us. Subscribe if you have not. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because we are not done yet. There is one more touch, and it is the one that answers everything. Thomas was not there the first time. That detail matters more than it might seem. The other disciples had gathered behind locked doors. John is specific about this. Locked doors. The kind of locking you do when you are afraid and you do not know what comes next. And into that locked room, somehow Jesus came, stood among them, showed them his hands, showed them his side. And the disciples were glad, John says, when they saw the Lord. But Thomas was not there. And when they told him, "We have seen him. He is alive. We saw his hands," Thomas said something that has made him infamous for 2,000 years. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, unless I put my finger where the nails were, unless I put my hand into his side, I will not believe." 3 conditions, all of them physical, all of them requiring contact. You could read Thomas harshly. The tradition often has. Doubting Thomas, the name itself a kind of gentle rebuke, a label that follows him out of the upper room and across 2 millennia of Christian memory. But sit with him for a moment before you judge him. This man had watched Jesus touch the untouchable, had watched the contamination run backwards, the current reverse, the wholeness move outward from that single point of contact. He had built his understanding of who Jesus was on a very physical foundation, on things he had seen happen to bodies, in real space, with his own eyes. And now they were telling him the body was back. Transformed, yes. Risen, yes. But back. And Thomas, who had learned to trust what he could touch, wanted to touch it. 1 week later, Jesus came again. Same room. Same locked doors. And this time Thomas was there. Jesus looks at him. He does not rebuke him. He does not sigh. He does not say, "You should have believed without this." He says something that must have moved through Thomas like a current. The same current the bleeding woman felt. The same reversal. The same wholeness traveling from one body to another across the short distance between them. Put your finger here, Jesus says. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. He offered his wounds to be touched. The risen Christ, on the other side of death, on the other side of everything the cross had done, still chose contact, still chose proximity, still reached toward the person in the room who needed the reach most. Not a vision, not a voice from a bright light. Hands, aside, the specific, particular, physical marks of what he had been through, offered not as proof of suffering but as invitation to belief. Thomas reaches out, or perhaps he does not need to anymore. Perhaps the offer itself is enough. The sight of Jesus standing there, unhurried, undefended, holding out the evidence of the nails and saying, "Here, come close. Do not be afraid of what you find." Perhaps what undoes Thomas is not the touch itself, but the willingness. The same willingness the leper asked about on the road outside the village. Are you willing to deal with me? Are you willing to come close? Answered here, one final time, in an upper room with locked doors and 8 witnesses, and the smell of fish still on the air from breakfast on the beach. My Lord and my God, Thomas says. 8 words, the highest confession in the Gospel of John, spoken not from a distance, not from the safety of received testimony, but from 3 feet away from the risen Jesus, who had just offered his wounds to be examined. And now the loop closes. He could have healed every single one of them without touching a single one of them. The centurion's servant, healed from across the city. Lazarus, raised with a shout into a sealed tomb. Distance was never a limitation. The power did not require proximity to work. He chose proximity anyway, every time. With the leper who had not been touched in years, with the bleeding woman who only asked for the hem, with the widow's son in his coffin, with the children the disciples turned away, with Malchus, the enemy, the servant, the man holding the rope in the garden in the dark, and here, at the end, with Thomas, with the one who needed to touch the wounds before he could believe in them. Even after the resurrection, he still chose not to use the distance, because here is what the purity system had wrong. Not the law itself, not the attempt to make space for holiness in ordinary life, but the direction, the assumption that holiness was fragile, that it had to be protected from contact with everything broken and bleeding and dead, or it would be diminished, contaminated, brought down to the level of what it touched. Jesus spent 3 years demonstrating that this was backwards. Holiness, carried fully enough, love, present completely enough, does not get contaminated by what it touches. It transforms it. The leper is clean. The bleeding stops. The dead sit up. The enemy's ear is whole. The doubter believes. Not because the touch was magic. Not because Jesus had found a loophole in the Levitical code. But because what he carried was of a different order entirely. Not a purity that had to be defended. A wholeness that could afford to reach. In a world that still tells certain people to step off the road. That still enforces its categories with quiet efficiency. That still decides who is worth the reach, and who can be helped from a safe and careful distance. That is not a small thing. It is not a detail. It is, perhaps, the whole point. The most scandalous thing about Jesus was never what he said about God. It was that he kept reaching out his hand,